Inside the 10. Michael Shamus, Dave Riccio and Andrew Webster. Great to have you all on the couch.
Danica.
All right, now let's start off with the discussion about the COVID bubbles. There is a lot of talk at the moment that these could be reintroduced with some cases rising in the community. Will they impose COVID bubbles, do you think, heading into the finals?
Look, I think they're going to put a lot of onus back on the clubs to try and contain and control this. The NRL are pretty confident the way things are tracking at the moment with the current testing regime that is. It's different. Fans are a little bit confused on how Cameron Munster and Murray Tuilagi went down in Origin camp, and that is because they were independent testers in Origin camp. They weren't affiliated with either team. In clubland, it is the footy manager. It is the team operations guy. It is in-house. So there's a lot of trust going on within clubland. And at this point in time, I believe the NRL are still pressing to follow that path with a few little tweaks potentially if we see a rise.
It's a lot of trust in the clubs, particularly as you get to the pointy end of the season. And the hypothetical's been thrown out there by quite a few people. What happened in grand final week if one of your superstars tests positive? Do you think a club might just turn a blind eye to that rat test?
Well, they will.
You reckon?
100%.
Well, as long as
it's a tricky one.
Leave the window open for them to turn a blind eye, then the clubs will. And if you get a mass breakout of COVID in grand final week, if I'm Nathan Cleary and Isaiah Yeo, Jerome Law, if they're out, if I'm Ivan Cleary, I'm not playing the grand final with 3 or 4 players out. Don't turn up to the game. We're going to be at a point where the NRL is going to invite trouble if we go into a bubble, because if they're going to test every single day, and we get players like Cameron Munster pulling out day before big games, prelims, I think the NRL's asking for trouble. I think the RLPA talking about now testing players if they're symptomatic. Now, the risk with that is, by the time you find out they're symptomatic, has it gone through the camp? So the NRL have got to work that out over the next few weeks. A lot will hinge on where the government is with regulations as well. We're talking maybe 5-day isolation coming up. If that's the case, then maybe players don't miss games if it's further enough out. So I think it's going to depend on what the government does.
Because at the moment, so in the US with the NFL, it's a 5-day isolation because of their rules over there, and they don't test unless they're symptomatic. I think in the AFL they're testing 2 times a week, I believe. But in
rugby league we're testing twice a day.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's where I find it really it's a tricky one. Like as you just alluded to, Michael, it's like if you're going to test, then be prepared for the consequences of testing positive.
Yeah.
But to maybe lessen that, then maybe a bubble is what's needed. And I wouldn't be surprised if clubs start restricting their players themselves.
Are you not inviting...
I think that conversation's being had, Webby, already. Boys have a buddy system. Luke Keary pairs up with Victor Radley. All the best with that. but that's the situation where clubs will, that's your partner, that's your guy you hang with, you go for coffees with. He's your guy, and restricting cafes, restaurants, etc.
It's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Choose your buddy wisely.
Yeah,
that's right.
But is that not also? I mean, we can't live like this forever.
That's
you
right.
can't. You can't continue to be in bubbles and stuff. But is it maybe not for the NRL, because if you're doing rules and regulations, you are inviting trouble for people to dob each other in and whatnot. Is it more just on the clubs to say, listen, guys, we're playing finals footy. This is a huge thing that we're doing. Just be careful.
To be honest, it's a little bit like what's happened the last 2 years. The clubs that have handled COVID the best and the isolation and biosecurity restrictions the best are the ones that win the comp. And I think it'll be the same this time, where the clubs that move better on their feet than the others will be the ones there at the pointy end of the season.
It's like the new alcohol ban, when all the players say, "Oh, we're not drinking for 6 weeks."
Yeah.
No, we're not going out in public places. Ban.
What they're banning alcohol.
All right, well, let's move on. Should the Warriors release Rhys Walsh to the Storm, and is it time for a dedicated loan system between clubs?
Well, the Warriors won't be releasing Rhys Walsh. They're quite steadfast on that. The Melbourne Storm have made overtures to try and prize him out, to try and fix their issues at fullback with Ryan Pappenhausen out. And the Warriors, they're within their rights to say, hang on, the only reason we released Rhys Walsh at the end of this season is to stay in Australia with his daughter and to remain in Brisbane. We're not going to release him now to move to Melbourne to be away from his daughter. So they're saying we still want to win matches, want to be competitive. Rhys Walsh is a part of that. won't be letting him go.
They're saying one thing, Dave, and doing another, though. He's on the bench, played 15 minutes yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, you still get to pick your team 1 to 17 each week on form and whatnot. But look, I think it does raise the prospect of a loan system, because it actually helps the Warriors' salary cap by letting him go early, because they can front load some pay elsewhere and fix their cap. And it certainly helps the Melbourne Storm, no doubt.
Are the Warriors proving a point, Dave? Are they just saying, are they privately bitter with the fact that he's leaving and are proving a point?
Oh no, I think their argument's reasonable. Again, Rhys Walsh wants to stay in Brisbane to be with his daughter. His daughter's not in Melbourne.
I think good on them. Yeah. It's not just because it can't be open season on the Warriors. You know, they've got to stand for something. They've already conceded one part of the contract. Why do they have to concede even more? I know what you're saying about him being on the bench. Well, Stacey Jones can use his roster however he wants. So I think it says more about the Warriors that they're digging in instead of just letting him go. They've still got some games to play this year.
There are clubs, though, who would want to get rid of, like, there was talk about Jaden Campbell, and there are some clubs who have salary cap issues in coming years who might want to release players over the next 6 weeks to ease that pain.
They should do that.
It might only be 50 or 60 grand.
The NRL should stop playing too constrictive on the transfer of players
Well, you're going to have to cancel a lot. As it stands right now, if a player was to go, you'd have to terminate their contract, go to the Melbourne Storm, and then re-sign them back on a new deal if they have more years on their contract. So the system doesn't allow it. But
More
the loan
flexibility.
system. But the fans were up in arms last year with Tavita Pangai Jr. when he went to Penrith, saying it's not fair. Look, I don't mind it. I like it, but it'll irk fans who get towards the big games at the end of the year and say, hang on a second, you can't just strengthen your roster at the 11th hour with players who are from other teams that they don't want.
But see, I don't get this. If they're under the cap, why not?
Yeah, and it's smart
if they're
management.
not breaching a cap,
I don't mind
why
it, but
not?
the fans were blowing up last year.
That team is running a risk to get to that point by leaving a spot open. They're running with one player less, thinking that maybe if we get to the back end, we might be able to strengthen our roster even further. It's actually a gamble on that club's behalf to run the season with a spot open, hoping that when we get there, let's go again and strengthen our roster.
Well, there's only a week to go, Danica. The deadline's August 1.
Yeah,
so.
and you understand why, injuries could happen. The Warriors, they want to be competitive in every single game. If someone goes down, they want to have Rhys Walsh as a backup there. You can understand that. All right, well, let's move on. The player unrest at the Dragons, reports of it, is it real?
Yeah, look, I reported last week that there are players at the club who aren't happy with Anthony Griffin's methodology, I said at the time, and there are players there. There's a feeling amongst the young guys that they're not developing, and we've seen over the last 12 months that some of them have stagnated in their development, some of them have fallen away, like Tyrell Sloan. And also said that there are players at the club who are well and truly behind Anthony Griffin, that trio of Ben Hunt, Andrew McCulloch and Josh Maguire. They've been with him since their Brisbane days. But they got the job done against Manly on the weekend, so that'll quieten it for a little bit. But you can rest assured there are people at the Dragons amongst the playing group who aren't thrilled with the way things are going under Anthony Griffin. Does that mean they have a right to whinge? Well, the Dragons have come out and blown up a little bit in regards to those players speaking out, or privately anyway. Does it give them the right to? Well, it's the modern game. That's a lot of players now. If we've seen player power at clubs where they've moved and gotten rid of coaches before. I think we've seen a little bit at the Tigers with Michael Maguire, where players weren't happy and it got out. And I think we're starting to see signs of that at the Dragons now.
There's cliques at clubs that aren't performing well. The thing with the Dragons is they're so hard to get a bloody read on. I don't know. There's parts of games and some matches where they look great and they look like a definite lock for the top 8, and sometimes you think, well, this is a bottom 2 team. And that's frustrating from a fan's point of view about, the direction they're headed in. Is Anthony Griffin the answer for the Dragons? Is he going to win a premiership, as he alluded to in his media conference the other day? Personally, I don't think so. I think that's why they should have gone for someone like a Serraldo. I know everyone's linking him to every club at the moment. But the only way they can stop the chatter is start winning.
It's a type of football, though. It's like after we saw the Rabbitohs first half. The Dragons put a score on the Rabbitohs in that first half in Wollongong. And then the instruction at half-time was to shut up shop, kick to corners, no offloads, get through the game. And I think a lot of the young guys who play with that natural flair and want to play football aren't exactly... That message isn't resonating with them, so there's frustration starting to build up.
Griffin's not a cuddle coach. Like, he doesn't do warm and fuzzy. And so, to Mick's point about the younger players, a lot of the younger players need that. And I'll just be interested to see if the headlines over the past week does alter the way Griffin does approach the team, so it was a good win the other night. So it will quieten the noise. But Hook does have that style. That's his style. Like it or not, that's the way he coaches.
Well, that's what the Dragons surely knew that when they were getting him.
But that's what they wanted. They said they wanted
but this is the
coach.
drama. They've got so many great young juniors coming through. Some in that team now, some through in the junior ranks. Is Anthony Griffin going to be able to get them to a premiership? That's the big question.
Big question. And that's my favourite term, cuddle coach.
There you go.